Citizenship Act है क्या?
Governs the law as far as the grant of and termination of citizenship by law.
By upholding this article, what does it mean for the rest of the states?
So the CAA you were referring to earlier is a different amendment. This is exclusively for Assam, so it doesn't affect the other states. So what happened is that
whenever the Amendment Act is talked about, going back to the Assam Accord, and there is a lot of hue and cry against it. What is it that drives that?
It has nothing to do with the Assam Accord.
But does the law structure, does it give that power to the government?
If you show the will, it will work. Demonetization worked in this country.
How do you view the current situation of a democratically elected government being thrown out?
Deal with it appropriately.
But whatever is happening in Bangladesh is also supposedly being enabled by the US.
I think every country works for its own interest. अपना देखना होगा. See, international relations are always national interest driven. The American national interest, they care a damn for what happens to the other country. And that we've seen.
The Janmabhoomi case. Tell us a little bit about Parasharan, sir.
Great jurist, a scholar, and also a man of great faith.
How could we sustain this battle of 500 years, fight that case in the court, and then win it?
This is a battle which was fought consistently for the last 500 years or more.
Mahabharata has over 1 lakh verses. Some verses from it, and putting it in the form of a book, which talks about Uttishta Jagrata Prapya Varanna Bodha. Arise, awake, and strive for knowledge. नमस्कार. आज हमारे साथ एक बहुत खास मेहमान है. He is a senior advocate at the Supreme Court. He is also a writer. His book Maxims of Mahabharata touches upon how we can use Mahabharata and reading the text today in our contemporary times, how we can use it for our own personality development and self-improvement. आज हमारे साथ हैं श्रीधर पोटराजू सर. नमस्कार सर.
नमस्कार.
वेलकम टू द इंडिक पेन. आज हम आपके 2 महत्वपूर्ण केसेस के ऊपर बात करना चाहेंगे. पहला केस है और जो कि आज भी रेगुलरली मीडिया न्यूज़ चैनल्स के माध्यम से हमारी ड्राइंग रूम तक कॉन्वर्सेशंस में रहता है. दैट इज़ द कॉन्वर्सेशन ऑन CAA. उसको लेकर अभी कुछ साल पहले बहुत मेजर प्रोटेस्ट भी हुए. आज भी जब भी उसकी बात होती है तो कहीं ना कहीं से खूब शोर मचता है. लेकिन CAA सिटीज़न अमेंडमेंट एक्ट से पहले अगर हम थोड़ा एक स्टेप बैक लें, सो देयर वाज द सिटीजनशिप एक्ट. आई वुड लाइक यू टू फर्स्ट हेल्प अस अंडरस्टैंड कि सिटीजनशिप एक्ट है क्या.
Citizenship Act actually governs the law as far as the grant of and termination of citizenship by law. So it is a parliamentary enactment which has come post-constitution.
Right.
The constitution gives citizenship to certain category of people who are eligible for citizenship by birth and by descent, for people who all were natives of this land pre-partition as well, the unpartitioned India as we all know.
Okay.
Now the Citizenship Act takes care of acquisition of citizenship subsequent to the constitution coming into force.
Okay.
Now when you mention the provisions of section 6A of the Citizenship Act, this is a special provision which has come in 1985. It governs the state of Assam. This was a result of a very long prolonged political agitation in concerning the Bangladeshi immigrants settling down in Assam. Assam has been at the receiving end of this influx of Bangladeshi immigrants right from the partition days.
Okay.
So what happened is that people had a common nation pre-partition. So before Pakistan was carved out with East and West Pakistans.
Right.
The current Bangladesh was East Pakistan with India in between the two geographical parts of Pakistan.
Right.
So there were migrations which were happening at that point of time also. And Assam especially was receiving at high rate people from Bangladesh into their territory. Now that led to a situation where it became a major political and social problem for the native Assamese people.
Of course, yeah.
They had to actually raise their voice, and it became a very large protest, which became a political agitation from 1979 onwards, eventually leading to the Assam Accord in 1985. So, as a consequence of the accord, the Section 6A was introduced. Now, what 6A does is, it recognizes people of Indian descent from a specified territory. Because by 1985, 1971 partition of Pakistan happened, and East Pakistan became a sovereign state, Bangladesh, the liberation war.
Right.
So the state of India was also receiving a lot of immigrants because of the genocide purely on the basis of the language and cultural differences between East and West Pakistan. So that was a classic case where the idea of Pakistan has actually failed, both on account of their cultural homogeneity or religious homogeneity.
Okay.
So that was a glaring example of religious homogeneity not being a factor at all to keep them together. At that stage, Indian government, as we all know, played a very important role in the liberation of Bangladesh, and thereafter the parliament stepped in to bring in the amendment. So what the amendment does is, it grants citizenship to people who had come to Assam prior to 1st January 1966. So anyone who has come into the Indian territory of Assam pre 1966 January 1st were deemed to be Indian citizens under the Section 6A.
Okay.
Thereafter, they created a second category of people who would have entered on or after 1st January 66 till 25th March 1971.
Okay.
So these people were to be identified as foreigners who had entered the Indian nation without valid papers, and they were entitled to citizenship rights and obligations minus the voting rights. So what happened is, the 1979 agitations were triggered because the demography of their constituencies started changing. And they were, thanks to the corrupt ecosystem which was there, vote bank politics probably have been there. I think they were enabling voting rights to all these illegal migrants, and the demography started changing. So the political agitation became very serious. So the government, acknowledging that, brings in the amendment and says that even if you are on the voters list, but if you are identified as a foreign national who's entered the Indian territory without valid papers as required under the Citizenship Act, the passport, and then the prescribed approvals for entering the country, the visa, etc., whatever the necessary identification marks and the approvals for entering the territory are required, they were given rights and obligations of a citizen minus their voting rights.
Okay.
Now what happens is that they were allowed to continue, and for a period of 10 years from their determination as a foreigner, they were not given the voting rights. Even if their names were there in the electoral rolls, they were to be removed.
Okay.
So that resulted in a class of citizen who had entered from 1st January 66 to 25th March 71 to enter the country, and who have managed to get their documents also by whatever means. They were deprived of their voting rights for a period of 10 years, and after 10 years, if they had applied for a citizenship registration, they were granted citizenship. So now there is a category of citizens who probably were granted citizenship till 25th March 71 who are entitled to, provided they had applied for it.
Okay.
Now the current scenario that we are looking at is post 25th March 1971. So the Constitution Bench of the Supreme Court was dealing with the challenge to the constitutional vires of Section 6A for keeping the state of Assam as a separate category as against the rest of the country. So discrimination is the ground on which it was challenged, apart from the other challenges that the homogeneity and the cultural rights of the Assamese people are violated under Article 29. It was recognized as an internal aggression earlier in the judgment of Sarvanand Sonowal by another bench of the Supreme Court in 2005. So, all these factors were raised to challenge the validity of Section 6A. So the majority opinion in this case takes a view that Section 6A was a result of a political settlement by the sovereign, that is the government of India. And as a consequence of that accord, that the enactment was brought into play, and it was well within the legislative competence of the parliament to enact anything relating to citizenship, as the power emanates from Article 11 of the Constitution.
So what does it mean for the other states? Because it's not just Assam which has seen this infiltration or illegal, people who don't have papers settling into Assam. All the border states are facing this problem, especially from Bangladesh and other areas, Pakistan and other areas. So what does it mean really for upholding this article? What does it mean for the rest of the states?
This is exclusively for Assam, so it doesn't affect the other states.
Okay.
So what happened is that Assam also had a 1983 Act which eventually was quashed in 2005 by the Supreme Court. So there was a special procedures prescribed therein. So effectively that was a legislation of appeasement which enabled that immigrants to continue, and the burden of proving that they are illegal was actually put on the complainants.
Oh, okay.
So therefore, the residents, the natives, had to complain, identify an illegal immigrant, and they could identify only those who are living within the same police station limits. So they are very physically proximate to these illegal migrants. Only they were qualified to raise the complaint.
Okay.
And they had to give affidavits of couple of others to confirm that complaint.
Okay.
And there were serious consequences if the complaint was found to be faulty.
Okay.
On the complainant. So therefore the natives were put at a very big challenge of exposing their identity against these illegal migrants, and also risking a prosecution, because ultimately an individual is not having the wherewithal to do all that what it takes to prove somebody is not a citizen. If you look at worldwide, the burden is always on the illegal immigrant to prove that he's entered the country illegally. I was just recalling when I was reviewing this judgment that if we go abroad, usually we carry a passport on our person when we are going for a local tour also. One, to be sure that the passport is secured with us, and then if anyone wants to verify your identity, and that is the document when you step out of your country. Now, to put the burden on the complainant is absolutely putting it the other way around. UK, Canada, or probably US, all of them put the burden on the illegal immigrant. Whereas a special law was created to put the burden on the Assamese people. So the constitutional challenge of that was raised in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court comes down very heavily. In fact, it's very interesting to observe even in Sarbanan Sonowal's case that arguments were raised by the state government, and depending on the political dispensation, the affidavits were shifting. Yeah, we're talking about around 2001, the Vajpayee regime to UPA regime.
Achha.
The Vajpayee regime, in fact, had filed affidavit saying that we are looking at repealing it, the 83 Act, because it's actually not working and it has failed. And as the time progressed, the UPA regime came and it's perfectly fine. It's good. We'll keep it. It actually protects Indian citizens, is what they say. So they've assumed that the act is actually to protect Indian citizens from being thrown out of India. Whereas the object of the act was to actually identify and ensure the illegal immigrants are thrown out. So therefore they virtually gave a presumption of Indian citizenship to everyone. So therefore that really failed. So the Supreme Court comes down heavily on that and recognizes, by referring to various international conventions also, that the influx of people at that scale is nothing short of an aggression on the state.
True. So it is identified as
aggression by Sonoband, that Sarbanan Sonowal's judgment. The Supreme Court recognized that it amounts to an aggression under Article 355. The central government has to step in.
So if it is understood in that manner by the authority and the law, why is it that whenever we start talking about the NRC, which is the Register of Citizens, and whenever the Amendment Act is talked about, there is again going back to the Assam Accord, and there is a lot of hue and cry against it. What is it that drives that?
Now, let me just put a small perspective on what is an act and what is an amendment. So the Citizenship Act is a 1955 act and periodic amendments are made.
Correct.
So now when we are talking about the Assam Accord, we are talking about the 1985 amendment which brought in section 6A. So the CAA you were referring to earlier is a different amendment.
Okay.
So it has nothing to do with the Assam Accord.
But it is to do with the current Citizenship Act of 1955.
No, the Citizenship Act 1955 is amended by Parliament periodically. So each amendment deals with certain provisions and for a certain purpose.
Right.
So the Assam Accord was section 6A only dealing with that issue. It doesn't deal with other issues. So the popularly referred CAA is of 2019,
correct,
which grants citizenship to minorities in theocracies. That is, to put it otherwise, land which was ancient Bharat or which was originally Hindustan. Strictly speaking, you would understand, Hindustan is a land on the Sindhu River.
Correct.
So people who lived or inhabited. So right from Afghanistan, Pakistan or Bangladesh, this entire landmass was Hindustan. So therefore, the irony is that people on our part of the geography now are Hindustanis, whereas the mainland are all now don't identify themselves as Hindustanis, though geographically it is Sindhu. Right. So now the amendment of 2019 seeks to grant citizenship to minorities which are Hindus or other minorities in this religious theocracy ruled by bigotry. See, if you look at the civilizational history of our land, for more than 1,000 years, this Hindustan or Bharat Varsh, as our Itihasas recognize it, were lands where a particular way of life was lived, and that's referred to as the Sanatana Dharma. So the land of Sanatana Dharma was expansive, as we all know. That land got invaded, and the bigotry which came with the invasions has ensured that certain parts of the geography got converted and then they were segregated from the mainland. So that process led to segregation of different parts, and then 1947 happened where Pakistan and Bangladesh or East Pakistan happened. So the continuum of that genocides is what we see even till date. The recent genocides in Bangladesh with the upheaval of the democratically elected government again is a continuum of the 1,000-year story of targeting non-believers by bigots. So, I mean, that has been a consistent attack on the way of life that people in this part of the land choose. So, if you look at it, Sanatan is inherently secular. So, secularism had to be introduced to tame, as I see, religions which were predatory in nature primarily.
Correct.
The predatory nature of the religions ensured that they completely finish the dividing line between the political and spiritual part of a faith. So they use the religion as a predatory tool to justify all bigotry. So probably for that kind of a bigotry was the need for secularism. Whereas in our part of the land, dharma was what prevailed. Raja Dharma governed the king, and the Samanya Dharma governed the citizen of the land.
Right.
So therefore there was no overlap. A king as a king would have a particular dharma, but as a father would have a different dharma. So the segregation was very natural and intrinsic. That was absent in the other faiths. So therefore secularism was invented in a land where they could not distinguish it, and that probably pushed them towards atheism as much. Certain ideologies which have cropped up of amoral ideologies because of a rejection of this kind of religious practices. Now coming back to the issue here, so that continuum of bigotry which dominates every aspect of your life is what resulted in a government of India to bring in that CAA in 2019, which recognizes that the genocides are still happening on people who are originally inhabitants of the undivided land, because the descent is common. Now it's interesting that to note that this section 6A also recognizes descent as a rule. So people who belonged or their grandparents belonged to the undivided India were the people who are entitled to the benefit of section 6A. So someone can not claim from him coming from any other part of the world a benefit of 6A, even if they come to Assam and settle down. So it was rooted in identity of Bharatvarsha as the original motherland, from which certain parts were carved out because of religious bigotry. So those people who had their ancestry here, or whose ancestors were part of the same land, which got now geographically torn apart into a theocracy, a religious theocracy, or called Pakistan or subsequently Bangladesh. So they were the people who were entitled to claim certain rights. Now people who continued to stay in those geographical areas and were choosing to continue a faith other than the state faith were being persecuted, as we all know.
Yeah.
And those persecutions continued purely on because of their faith and no other reason. So where do they go? So in that sense, the law recognizes that this is the only place they can go back
The
to.
natural.
So that recognition is what the current judgment of the Supreme Court also does in re Section 6A as well. Here they recognize that this is the land which was unpartitioned land on which the ancestors of the people who are now trying to move in are claiming. Now, if I also digress here and then also identify the demographic profiling or the demographic domination of certain areas, it doesn't look that innocent. Because the Supreme Court judgment in Sarbanand Sonowal actually quotes the report of the governor of Assam, sometime I think in 98, which was sent to the central government. I don't recall the name of the governor. He was a senior army officer, a retired army officer. He quotes both Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and also the founding father of Bangladesh. Both of them recognize that Kashmir is not the only issue which is pending. Assam is an issue.
Okay.
For East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. So for them, the partition was an incomplete agenda. Assam is part of that larger agenda. This is documented in a Supreme Court judgment reported in 2005.
Okay.
So, I mean, when I read it, I think, wow, this I never heard, and this is not a perspective which is not discussed in public as well. So they've quoted their own publications. So when you see that kind of identity issue which encourages probably the migration of people at that scale, and you have a political appeasement happening on this side of the border to suit their kind of politics. Now what is resulting is creation of another dense border state with a particular demographic profile, which is again willing to cede from the larger territory called India, that is Bharat.
Correct.
So that seems to be the larger agenda. I mean, I just correlated with people keep talking about the chicken neck and then control the chicken neck.
I was about to
now
ask
it's just not out of place. It's a well thought out doctrine which has been out there probably since our partition. And it's still being played out. And it's that serious that, I am surprised that there's no discussion or debate about these publications which are quoted in a Supreme Court judgment.
But sir, tell me something. How does the law really help in this matter now? We have a situation where the border states, as I said, are already inflicted with illegal migration. We have people who have been displaced from Pakistan because of being minorities there. They've run away from there and they've taken shelter in India because that's their natural. They also are people who are without a citizenship right now. They are Hindus, they are a demography, they are a faith system that is a minority in Pakistan. Similar cases might be happening now in Bangladesh, given that there is a rise of the Islamist radical political movement there. Now, how do you, since you are the person from the law side, what currently protects the country from being, because we don't see anything happening in regard with people who are without a citizenship continuing to stay here, either being given citizenship or being taken away or being moved out of the country because they don't belong here.
See, the difficulty for law is that
there's the human element
as well. And then that aside, statelessness is not something which any nation can approve of. Someone who's without a state. I mean, if you refer to the Hollywood movie Terminal, a stateless person who's stuck in an airport terminal. So therefore, that's a very serious human problem. But beyond that, the hope that I see is that the Constitution Bench has declared that to be illegal. And it has interpreted Section 6A while upholding it as a positive duty on the government to identify and deport them. And the Supreme Court has taken upon itself the task of monitoring that process. Because if you look at it, a person who's entered India post 25th March 1971 and he's continued here, I mean, would be about a little older than me. He'll be 53 now.
Right.
So he would have raised children here. He's illegal immigrant. He has no rights here. Now what happens to the people who are born to him? So therefore these complex legal issues would arise. And then how do we deal with that situation as well? So because the 2003 amendment to the Citizenship Act starts controlling. I mean, if you see the amendments, they're very aligned with the political ideology of the government. It's no brainer. So the government says that if one of your parent is Indian and the other is not an illegal immigrant, then you will be entitled to citizenship. But that comes in with effect from 2003-4. But anyone who's come in, it's a grey area. It's a grey area. So there will be people who would have come in. No, but we need to draw a line at some point of time. Because if the idea of partition was on a basis of a particular belief that people, because of their religious identity, can't be together, now the recognition of that identity as a method of targeting such people who choose to continue there in the places their ancestors lived, and they happen to be the other side in a theocracy now. Now they are left with very little choice. Either you choose to give up your faith or you face the consequence. So we still, probably across the border, still the Mughals are ruling. You pay a jizya or a seriously similar task, or you give in. So that's exactly what is happening across the border. Now, if people choose to continue with their faith, where do they go? Absolutely humanitarian criterion that the government brings in the 2019 thing. Now, anywhere else in the world, this is a valid ground for actually granting of any kind of amnesty or a status of a refugee, or probably citizenship also. I recall in Delhi University, I mean, I can't name people, but people writing for their scholarships in UK and US that I belong to an oppressed minority to get a scholarship. Come on, beat that. I'm talking about 1996. Someone who's living in a very good hostel, having all the facilities, writes that I belong to an oppressed minority group and therefore I need scholarship, and they're taken up, lapped up for scholarships and other benefits.
But the effect of that is already evident in what's happening in Europe, in UK especially.
Absolutely.
US, I think with Trump, things are going to drastically start changing when he comes into office, because he's been very vocal about illegal immigration. In fact, to the extent of, driving them out of the country. That is, again, it brings me back to the question. Why are we not able to take that position of strength to drive people out? Because as it is, we are an heavily populated country. There is a pressure on resources. It's a very natural requirement for our own people in the country to thrive better if there are lesser people to, fight with for the same resources.
Probably, see, what happens is we are people who are completely given into the concept of dharma. As a civilization, as people, at every level, irrespective of faith. So what happens is, for us, someone who's come seeking some kind of protection, we are duty bound to protect them. Is the value system that our culture or our civilizational heritage gives us. So now, if that has been used or misused or abused as a weakness, I think it's time that we recalibrate ourselves to segregate a legitimate seeker of protection as against a strategic move for a larger incomplete doctrines from being implemented on ground.
But does the current law structure, does it give that power to the government to take that action, or there are still ambiguities?
See, law is what it is. It's the enforcer who has to show the will.
Correct.
So I don't think we are short of any law. Where is the will to enforce the law and implement it on ground? If you show the will, it will work. Demonetization worked in this country. If you have a will. GST has worked in this country with dynamic tweaking whenever they required it.
But still, Amit Shah everywhere talks about CAA and NRC and still doesn't
what happens is
implement it after the initial protests.
There's a huge
in
law and order issue which the government has to tackle. And then you also have a lot of complexities which go in moving people in the scale that they have come in. Like UK tried probably hiring some land, some foreign land, and put them on an aircraft. Where do we send them?
Why doesn't Bangladesh or Myanmar take them back?
If they were taking back, I'm sure they would have taken back by now. There's a larger probably, thinking probably in sending so many people on this side, apart from the people who are actually being persecuted.
Yeah.
So, I mean, ultimately what happens is if you're driven by some bigotry as an end goal, and people who can blow themselves up having that kind of a conviction, if you're having some of them coming in as well, it's dangerous for the internal security of the land.
True.
I mean, for all of us who actually believe in certain rule of law and secularism as a social value, you allow people who don't believe in these values. So what are we doing here?
And that's already started to happen in several pockets in the country
itself.
itself.
I think our secular values are at stake. And the government has to show that secularism works in protecting people who believe in secularism. And it's merely not an empty slogan as far as Sanatan is concerned. Secularism is inspired from Sanatan. It is actually Sanatan in action is secularism, segregating your political and non-political and religious things, which is very natural for a Sanatani practitioner.
True.
As a professional, I have my dharma. As a parent, I have my dharma. And as probably a person, as a citizen, my dharmas are clear. That's secularism for you, isn't it? So it's very natural for us. Now it's the leash on bigotry that was invented. It's a leash, I think, secularism, for controlling certain bigotry in the land it was required and it was invented. And that leash has been used on the people who are innately actually not predatory in their nature. So I think we should recognize it and then actually encourage secularism as a conversational topic to say that, boss, this is what secularism is, and why are you encouraging bigotry to come into our land? You should actually accept secularism as a value, social value and a lived value, and then probably take it forward.
I would like to also talk to you about the recent article that you wrote on Bangladesh and the changing political environment there. But before that, let me maybe give it a pause here and ask you if I have understood it so far correctly for our viewers also to probably. So there is a Citizenship Act in place. Every few years or every few regimes there is an amendment depending on the political scenario so far. It's not really the need driven but more a political driven tool that is currently coming into force. Maybe at times it is also based on what they feel will benefit the people of India. That's already in place. There are illegal immigrants already in India, both by way of bigotry or by way of also persecution, religious persecution. The latest Amendment Act, which has been a bone of contention for both the regime and people who've been opposing it vehemently on streets, is something that can at the moment be implemented. We have enough powers. The law of land has given enough powers to the current regime to implement it, is what I understand.
Absolutely. I mean, the amendments are probably to meet the exigencies of a situation or as a policy.
Now, coming back to your article on Bangladesh and the changing political scenario there, how do you view the current situation of a democratically elected government being thrown out and, it being replaced by somebody who was brought in from the US, and suddenly you see that it's all gone downhill? And how is it in terms of, because Bangladesh is our immediate partner and it is already starting to pose a serious problem for us. How do you see that relationship moving ahead in terms of both the legal aspect as well as the social and demographic aspect?
As I had articulated in my my opinion piece, this is a continuum. I don't see anything new. This is what Will Durant has recorded in his Story of Civilization when he was dealing with India. This is a country which has been plundered, abused by religious bigotry. And that continues. I mean, I'm not surprised, because what you read in Story of Civilization is exactly what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening in Pakistan, and what's happening in Bangladesh recently. So therefore, the thought or the bigotry which actually plundered our land, our value systems, our libraries, our temples, is what is again continuing. So, I mean, I think we should accept the continuum of the same thought and then deal with it appropriately.
And try and protect our people from it.
Absolutely. No, I think people who are in denial should wake up and see. Please read your history. I mean, Will Durant is definitely not from our part of the land. Read his Story of Civilization. Read what he writes about what happened to this country over the 1,000 years of invasions.
But whatever is happening in Bangladesh is also supposedly being enabled by the US, which is not, currently at least so far, not a majority of the faith system as they are trying to impose upon others through, this kind of Islamic extremism taking over a democratically elected government. What do you have to, your opinion on that?
I think Mr. Jaishankar is more competent on foreign affairs than me.
True.
So, but as a citizen and someone who's been observing things and see certain patterns, I think every country works for its own interest. Apna apna dekhna hoga.
Correct.
And that's probably the foreign policy that India has finally adopted. See, international relations are always national interest driven. So whatever is the American national interest, they care a damn for what happens to the other country. And that we've seen. Chemical weapons, arey bhool gaye, nahi mila. That's what America is all about, right? So it's their interest that they protect, and they're entitled to protect their interests. So I think we should look at our interest and protect our interest and play up, and that's precisely what probably the current foreign policy seems to be doing, and they are the experts on the subject. I guess they know what they're doing, and it seems right to me as well.
Another very important case was the Janmabhoomi case, and you were in the core team of Parasharan sir. Before I get into more details of the Janmabhoomi case, tell us a little bit about Parasharan sir.
Well, my association with sir has been almost more than 2 decades. So he was a very young man then, probably in 70s when I got to know him.
Yeah.
Now he's about 97.
97, true.
So now you'll have to put the context. I think I'm at least about 45, 47 years younger than him.
Wow.
So that's the gap that I have with him. So it's only a relationship of reverence and awe. Because by the time I met him, he was already a legend. And he had been an attorney general twice, and a great jurist, a scholar, and also a man of great faith. So my experience with him, I would put it on a personal level, is like we use the phrase Ramo Vigrahavan Dharmaha. That is, Rama personifies Dharma. I always felt that Parasharan sir personifies faith for me. Because for me, to define faith was very simple. I mean, I was bad in school, and so my relationship with God was just before the exam and just before the results.
Right.
It was very, very transactional, and I was okay with it, and my God is absolutely fine with me on that count. But to take it to the next level, on his very spiritual sense, when I speak about it, watching sir in his own personal life, in his professional space, there's no duality. See, what we see is most of the professionals, when I came into the profession, I'm a first generation lawyer, I don't belong to Delhi. So initial years, I was mentioning to someone recently as well, that the first thing out of probably about 5-6 years of profession, when I got my feet in place, I thought, boss, you need to pick up a very big vice to be successful. So a vice is what makes you successful, is what my first thoughts
Thought
were.
were.
But then gradually I started meeting people as I spent more years, people who are not on your face, who are not jazzy, who are not there to be seen, but they are there. So you need to go into certain depth to actually even recognize their presence or know them. Once you start knowing them, you feel that this is all superficial. So there are people who practice their values, who live their values, and they are great, and they are respected, and the kind of respect they command, both in their presence and in absence, actually defines people commanding respect and not demanding it per se.
True. So, sir, it's a 500-year-old battle, and to put in context, I would like you to rather, in fact, try and make us understand, for somebody who is like a 20-year-old right now, how will you bring it into his perspective as to how could we sustain this battle of 500 years, get it into the court of law, get it, fight that case in the court, and then win it?
As far as I see this case is concerned, it's not a battle which is won in the last 50 or 70 years. This is a battle which was fought consistently for the last 500 years or more. So the battle was not really about a place per se. The battle was between a bigotry and people who believed in certain values represented by our Ram. So the values that we believe in, as against the bigotry which tried to trump the values and impose a structure to just put you down, to show that bigotry prevails. So therefore, it was more a victory of righteousness over evil, as I see it. Righteousness for the reason, because we fought the battle in all formats that were fought contemporaneously. There were physical fights which were happening. People lost their lives. People kept on playing, a lone man standing there fighting it out. Once the British came in, they tried to create a artificial partition in the premises to create an inner courtyard, outer courtyard. And then the matters went to the British courts in 1885, 87, where the British judge says, boss, this is a bigot. A bigot is not my word. Bigot is what 1887, the judge said, a British judge said, the bigot called Babur built this over a place most revered Lord Ram's place of birth.
So the first time it came into courts was in 1880s.
Yeah, it in 1880s. This is not a new battle. So the battles were fought much before the British entered. Various historians recorded. In fact, one thing I learned from this, people of faith on either side were truthful to their faith. They put truth as a very essence of faith. So people admitted, even if they were opposing our case, admitted that from times immemorial, the Hindus have been worshipping this place, believing it to be the place of birth. So therefore, I always felt that people of faith definitely have certain values which they will not compromise. Right, on either side. And there are people who are amoral. They are driven by their ideologies. They were the real troublemakers post-independence. They are the people who believe in probably fragmentation of society to get their revolution flowing, so that they can get whatever end goals their revolutionary ideologies lead them to, whatever be the means. Because they are amoral, they're neither the means matter nor the ends matter, as long as they're getting what they want, whichever way. So be that as it may. Now what happens is, here people change the format of their contests post-independence. It will be interesting to note that the first suit, which eventually the first appeal got decided in 2019, was filed pre-constitution. 16 January 1950. Our constitution comes into force on 26 January.
Yeah.
So the first suit was filed in 16 January 1950. The suit gets adjudicated in 2010, 60 years. And 2019, you get a first appeal adjudicated. Fortunately, there are no further appeals. Just visualize. So that has actually helped me explain clients who are very annoyed by the delays in courts. I said, but इस देश में रामलाला को 70 साल wait करना पड़ा. आप उनसे बड़े हो तो बता दो.
Sir, but my question was about this exact fact. Why does justice become such an arduous journey? I mean, why can't we have quick justice? Why does it take so long to fight, sometimes generations, to fight a case in the court of law? And you know, there are ये रामलला थे, इनके पीछे इतनी बड़ी फौज आज भी लगी थी to fight that case. But many of us don't have that, freedom or money or.
See, India with the kind of population that it has and the constraint on our resources, the infrastructure, the number of judges available is absolutely disproportionate. So therefore, I think if from point A to point B you have to reach, without traffic you would reach in 20 minutes, but it can take 3 hours on a good traffic day. So I mean that's the reality about your delays in justice administration as much. They are crowded.
But we've also seen suo motos being taken on things which
No,
can
see what
very
happens
quick.
is suo moto is where the courts feel there's a larger issue at stake and they can probably address it quickly. That's where they take it up suo moto, and then see that is the power which the constitution framers have recognized and given it to an institution which carries it with great sense of responsibility, as I see it.
Coming back to Ram Janmabhoomi and the case, what were the evidences in the court? What kind of, in the first place, were the evidences during your when you got into the case and during your association with the case? What kind of evidences were there which actually allowed us to win that case?
See,
Especially against Waqf, which is kind of taking over the entire country now. Everything is being.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, see, if you see, I mean, if I can just go back a little into our own itihasas and Puranas, all the Dashawataras came when the time was ripe. So, जब पाप की गड़ा भर जाता है तब जाके विष्णु अवतार लेते हैं.
जी.
So I think there's always a time when things would happen and we have to be patient. वक्त आएगा, मेरा नंबर आएगा वाला बात. So insofar as the evidence is concerned, so by the time I joined, it was already in appeal in Supreme Court, and normally just to put the procedural law in place, that the evidence comes only in the trial stage. Very rarely new evidence is taken in the appellate stage.
Okay.
So therefore the evidence stage was over in the trial court where the trial happened before the Allahabad High Court. So the judgment came in 2010. So the appeals were brought into Supreme Court and everyone was not happy with the trifurcation of that small piece of land, which was about 1500 square yards. The disputed land is 1500 square yards.
Yeah.
So that's the scope of that petition. So now the evidence was of individuals who knew about it because they went to worship there on either side. There were people who actually vouched for some expertise in religious texts. And apart from a lot of documentary evidence, including your Valmiki Ramayana, Skand Puran, and multiple materials, historians, gazetteers. So the documents were running into hundreds and thousands of pages. The depositions were there. Then the archaeological evidence came in, because the interesting case is, to put it in very simple terms, the Hindu side set up a case, as I said, in 1950. An individual comes and says that my Ramlala is there. I need to exercise my right to worship him, offer him his daily prasad, because we believe Ramlala is a living entity. So I need to take care of him as a minor and tend to him. So that was the first suit filed. Thereafter, there was a suit by the Nirmohi Akhada, who claimed to be the Shavayats or the custodians of the place, claiming their rights to manage the place. Then came the Sunni Waqf Board. They claimed that this land belongs to the Muslim community, more specifically the Sunnis, that this land needs to be declared as a land belonging to the masjid, and they are the masjid was built on a vacant land. In civil law, I mean, when you come with a plaint or a written statement, what you say in the original proceeding actually binds you. You can't just resile and keep jumping over
Changing
one
it.
side to the other that easily. You need to move a formal amendment, explain why you are changing the stand. Some are allowed, many are rejected. So the crux of the case is the Hindu side says that there was a temple which was demolished and the present structure was built by Babur. The Muslim side also says that Babur built it, but it was a vacant land. So that's the short point involved. So now how do you decide, like, this land belongs to my grandparents, there was a manzil here, and now I come and see that somebody else has built something. It was built on my grandfather's building. It's broadly simplified expression. So now how do you decide whether there's a building or not? You go and have a look at it. So the ocular evidence from the pictures taken by the court commissioners, etc., clearly depict that the structure, when it existed also, had kasoti pillars which were typical of a Hindu temple. The black pillars with lotus, idols, gods and goddesses sculptures, some defaced, some not, tortoise, makara, and all those symbols which are very naturally associated with a Vaishnavite or a Hindu worship tradition. But be that as it may, the court felt that there should be more scientific evidence. What happened is, in 1991, the government had acquired that entire land as the political agitation for redeeming that land was on the streets. So they acquired that land and said all suits would abate. So the matter was carried to the Supreme Court. A constitution bench of the Supreme Court declares that the acquisition and custody of the land is fine, but you can't declare that the suit gets abated.
Okay.
Because in the constitutional scheme, the adjudication of contesting claims or rights comes only through the adjudication mechanism through the judiciary, which is a basic feature of our constitution. So there was a dissenting opinion, but the dissenting judges also said that there should be archaeological or scientific evidence to decide these kind of issues. Because there is an issue of faith of two rival religions which probably are at odds before the court. So the High Court, in its wisdom, I think rightly so, thought of gathering some technical information to understand if the land was vacant on which this was built, because the evidence from the structure was to the contrary.
Okay.
Because the structure was not having its own foundation, or it was built on something else. It was evident. So they did some kind of a ground penetration technology was used, and they found that there is something there. So when this was ordered, the Hindu side wasn't sure, because we were going on faith. Shruti Smriti from our ancestors.
True.
So then they said this will happen, and then equal number of people from both faiths were involved in the excavation work by the ASI.
Okay.
It was videographed. There were people from the judiciary who were monitoring it while the excavation was happening. So abundant care and caution was taken to ensure that there is no kind of a doubt left as to the process involved for ascertaining it through a scientific investigation by the ASI. And when the report came in, they said that as we dug outside the premises and found there were structures which are definitely non-Islamic and which date back to the 10th century.
Oh, wow.
So now both sides were fighting कि 500 साल का है, लेकिन ASI said that यह तो 1000 साल का है. The earlier structures were there, 7 layers of earlier construction remnants and things were retrieved from there. So that became a report which was submitted with photographs to the trial, the High Court which was conducting the trial. So that became the scientific objective evidence on the basis of which the claim that it was a vacant land got rejected. So once that claim goes, then question is, what is this land about?
Right.
Then the evidence was on the belief of people or faith of people. Now what's the faith of the people and what is the evidentiary value of faith? Now I think the modern law of evidence or the modern common law methods that we have adopted for adjudication of disputes recognizes that certain things can't be proved in a court of law, namely proving God. But what can be proved is the existence of faith. So like in a child custody case, how do you prove that you care your child? To say that कि मैं उसको यहाँ घुमाने ले गया, father would only show, I've taken them for holidays, I've taken them to the amusement parks, I pay their fees. This is the evidence to demonstrate the father's love for a child, right? Otherwise, mothers are beholden to be the most love givers,
True.
which is so true, which is natural. But for a father, it has to be demonstrated. Mother doesn't have to prove it. As a lawyer, I can say that. The mothers don't have to prove it. It's assumed. It's presumed. It's very difficult to dislodge that presumption.
Right.
But when it comes to a father, the burden is very high. So that was the burden that the Hindus were carrying in this. Okay, what is the faith? How do you prove your faith that it exists? So there again, people of faith who were truthful vouched for it and said that yes, Hindus were worshipping here, believing that specific place as a place of birth of Ram for times immemorial, for hundreds of years.
And
that's the oral depositions.
And this is people who
from
were not
Muslims.
From the
people of faith. See, I see people of faith are all on one side. People of ideology are on the other side. They were actually trying to create fissures because उनकी ideological रोटी वो तभी सेकेंगे जब वो टूटेगा.
True.
When there is a binary of oppressor oppressed, then the ideology will succeed. So if you look at it, any society, unless it's fragmented, the ideology will not survive. So you need to actually deliberately vilify someone, and so you build whatever it takes to story around it. So the historians were the villains of this piece, as I see, because they lacked integrity. They lacked their professional integrity, and this is what I say on the basis of reading the judgment of the Allahabad High Court, on the basis of what the Supreme Court has commented in the appendix to the judgment, and also on the cross-examination. People who have not visited, come to Ayodhya, claim to be experts on the subject that there is no temple. I mean, so therefore, that's lack of integrity. I mean, if you as a professional journalist, you see certain facts, if you distort them, then you are no longer a journalist with integrity. You are then doing something else. You are peddling some narrative or peddling stories for people.
True.
So people without integrity were the problem in this case, as I see, because they, in spite of the ASI report, were belligerently trying to come and assert that there was no temple, or there was that whatever was found was an Eidgah. That's nobody's case. In fact, Justice Abdul Nazir on the bench actually asked, do you even know what an Eidgah is? Your case is it's a masjid. Masjid and Eidgah, two different things. So you can't just improvise your case ki kuch bhi ho jaye, main nahi dungi. That was the arguments made in Supreme Court. Unfortunately, see, I mean, that shows the desperation of the argument rather than the merits of the case. To take such pleas which are not born out of record or any scientific evidence. So, and unfortunately, when people who are actually at dispute probably find a solution, but when others step in and their agendas drive the fight, that's what happened here.
And that is also not allowing people to continue with their making insinuations and, making remarks or taking pot shots. There was some comment made by Justice Chandrachud on which I think again it was raked that, how this decision was not really in good faith.
It takes grace to accept certain things. Absence of grace, sour grapes. Can't help it.
Okay. But then now it is like, ab Mathura baki hai. There is another case on for Mathura, and I think there is yet another set of people who say that jahan mandir dabe hue hai, that we all need to reclaim that. As a person of law, what do you have to say about that?
See, when we have given ourselves a constitution, rule of law, democracy, with separation of powers, and there is a mode of adjudication of disputes. What are the modes of adjudication of disputes? As we were discussing the Janmabhoomi case, was where there was a violent attack, the attacks were repelled, some attacks were successful, and the existing structures got demolished, and it's true for many places across the country. I mean, I don't think we need any more evidence on that factum of demolition of our places of worship, or burning down of our libraries or places of learning. Be that as it may, then what happens is, how do people resolve or at least agitate their grievance? Do they have a remedy, or they are to just follow it in a constitutional democracy? Any person who is aggrieved has a constitutional right to take judicial remedies, which is the right thing to do in any rule of law democracy. So if someone goes to court with a case, it's for him to prove his case. Why should anyone have a problem about it? If he is not allowed to go to court, where would he go? You don't want them to create political agitations on it. They respect that because we are a democracy. You have a right of protest, but your right of protest ends when you are inconveniencing the other citizens.
Right.
Isn't it? So therefore, that's one mode. But if you are actually adopting a civilized mode of argumentation, which is the traditional, we are a land of arguments.
True.
The entire Vedic knowledge has evolved through Samvada. Right? We have a science of debate. Right? Samvada, Vada, Jalpa, Vitanda. And I think that's the correct course of action which is being taken, and the courts are competent. We have well-trained judges, we have well-established precedents and laws which will govern these issues.
But then there is also an opinion that the minority is being aggrieved by raking up these issues with every place, because what has happened in the past many hundred years ago. Why do you have to keep raking it up again?
See, the point is that where do you draw a line? It's very convenient for someone to draw a line. I mean, probably you said that the law of limitation comes in. That's broadly the best argument to draw a line.
Right.
So that argument was also raised as far as Ayodhya is concerned. The court gave a finding that the suits were not barred by limitation. See, I'll just explain what is the law of limitation. Is that when you give up your right and you don't assert it. But people have been asserting their rights. They're going there and worshipping it. So you do not have exclusive access, or you do not have exclusive position. So what kind of a title would anyone have who doesn't have an exclusive position or a control over a premises? And if it is partitioned artificially, so therefore one single complex, there's a forcible partition or a partition to maintain law and order by the local administration, does not take away your rights. Isn't it? If you have a farmland, your neighbors, you are cultivating your part and the other person is cultivating your lands, but the title doesn't change. You keep asserting it. Right? If somebody is encroaching into your land, for generations people will say that, sorry, it's not the case. I mean, it's not permitted. And that's exactly what is done, and then you take it to a court of law. That's the civilized way of doing it. Isn't it?
Have you been to Ayodhya after the Pran Pratishta?
I was fortunate to visit Ayodhya immediately after the judgment, and then I was also invited for the Pran Pratishta. So I was there for the Pran Pratishta.
How wonderful. How wonderful. So moving a little ahead and to the last part of our conversation is primarily on your book, Maxims from Mahabharata. Mahabharata has almost like over 1 lakh verses. Picking up some verses from it and putting it in the form of a book which talks about everything from leadership to life skills to even mental health. Tell us a little bit about this journey of your getting initiated into something like this, where you are interpreting it and setting it up for a modern day reader to understand it better.
I was fortunate to be familiar with Ramayana and Mahabharata from my childhood. I used to read, so I read that in the Telugu version, and then the Rajgopalachari's version of Ramayana and Mahabharata. And then at a point, I probably definitely can say I was inspired by Parasharan sir mentioning multiple times that he's been reading Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana every day since 1957. Every day. Wow. I know for a fact. So that probably at some stage in life, I also felt the need as a professional. Here I come in as a professional. The need to up your ante and then improve your understanding. See, what happens is that 10-15 years into profession, you hit a glass ceiling. Men also have glass ceilings.
Okay.
So I had hit that glass ceiling. So to break the glass ceilings intellectually, to open up my mind, I had to find some avenue where I can actually explore and learn. I felt the need to learn. So at that point of time, I was exploring probably Western jurisprudence and all. But somehow I felt that I couldn't relate much to it. And then Ramayana and Mahabharata were very natural for me. But the simplest thing is that Ramayana and Mahabharata, as I see, are not really religious texts. They are biographies of people who lived here. So if you're reading a biography of someone whose biography has been retold for thousands of years, then there's definitely something in it.
Right.
The bestseller for continuously for so many years. So what does it mean? It means there's definitely something in it which is being relished and handed down for generations for across the world now. It's definitely a cultural heritage for the world now, Ramayana and Mahabharata. And for me also, the need came from expounding my understanding of the nuances of law and jurisprudence. And in a very interesting manner. Because if you read Western jurisprudence, I find that it was very bland after a point. You know the principle, but it's bland to read those authors. Sorry, it's my personal opinion, but I don't really get into it at all. For me, but reading a Ramayana or Mahabharata, there's so much drama happening.
True.
So you get jurisprudence along with the drama parallelly. It keeps you engrossed. And then multiple life situations. See, the entire law has developed through case law. And what do we mean by case law? Case law is different contests coming to court in different factual backdrops and a principle of law emerging.
Right.
So Ramayana and Mahabharata have thousands and thousands of such conflicts.
Yeah.
They are a repository of case law.
True.
And then the principles that emerge are eternal and they're universal. So, I mean, when I started reading and being a lawyer, and then I got this habit of taking a pen and marking whatever. So I start buying my books. I don't borrow books because it will not be in a shape to return if I start marking it. So I picked it up from my father. So I started marking it. And every time I marked, "Arey, ye to beautiful principle hai." So I kept marking and it went on. And then I figured out that, boss, this is like amazing pearls of wisdom, which is eternal. Now I understand why Sanatan or Hinduism is called a way of life. Because they don't tell you to do this or do that. You're free. You eat pizza, you eat pizza. You do eat pasta, you eat pasta. But please be hygienic. That's it. So whatever you do, do it properly. Do it hygienically. Don't inconvenience yourself. Don't inconvenience others.
Right.
And don't harm the nature. This is the triangulation. Atma, Paramatma and the nature. So, I mean, see, it's so integrated that for me it was quite appealing. And then I felt probably I had the privilege because we believe that it's only Sukritam that you can get to read certain texts. I felt that I had the Sukritam to be able to read it and understand it. And then being in the profession, the way I look at it, I felt that this is something which probably is very necessary for the times we live. See, I mean, I never heard of mental health and all that when I was growing up.
Right.
In fact, when I was a youngster in the profession also, I didn't hear about it. So now I hear mental health so often. मैंने कहा ये कहाँ से आ गया अचानक सिलेबस में तो था ही नहीं 30 साल के पहले. So then I figured out, but we were having access to Ramayana and Mahabharata. So उसमें mental health ही mental health है.
Correct.
So everyone is depressed, everyone is lost, everyone is defeated, everyone is contemplating suicide. Then and how they turn it around.
True.
How they turn their situation in life and turn it around in a positive way without compromising on values, without actually giving up on their core, and then still emerge victorious. And that is why we retain those characters. If you look at it, we don't write history by calendar, what the West does.
True.
We retain our heroes by values. So for us, it really doesn't matter if it is, for some it may be important. For me, it doesn't matter if it is 100-year-old or 1 lakh years old. What remains is the values that I remember. So therefore, I think that's the takeaway for me. And then I felt that as a lawyer, I mean, here I come in more as a disgruntled law student who couldn't understand Latin. And you've not made it if you don't know those maxims. And I wrote about it in the story behind the book. So if you don't quote it in the right pronunciation, boss, ये तो हिंदी मीडियम है या तेलुगु मीडियम है. You look down. So welcome to Delhi. So so I felt that personally, and I said, yeah, but why are Indian languages left behind? Every Indian language is a repository of immense literary wealth.
Of course.
So why are we not actually using our maxims? So for me, it's easiest was to do from Ramayana and Mahabharata, and English being the common language for youngsters to relate.
Understand, yeah.
So that became a language of choice for me as well, because I also got disconnected from reading or at least writing Telugu. So I find more comfortable access to literature in English now. So I use that as a base to actually cull out the principles. And then I heard someone say that give a lazy man a difficult task and he'll make it the most efficient way, and this is the result. I was hoping somebody else will do it. Nobody did it, so I took it upon myself and did it efficiently with the easiest maxims to translate, not knowing Sanskrit. That is the icing on the cake.
No, but thank you for doing that. Actually, it brings in a lot more positivity into and gives you it actually makes you think differently, which usually, because of not having access to Sanskrit and Sanskrit not being a very universally spoken language in Bharat anymore.
Actually, Sanskrit has been the victim of language racism.
True.
People who talk about racism actually practice it when it comes to Sanskrit.
True. So it was very important to have something out, which simplifies it for especially the young people. My last question to you is about this cultural revival. I mean, how do you view this cultural revival currently the country is seeing? Do you think it's very superficial, or do you think that suddenly, because it is also with this revival, there is also a lot of chaos. There is a lot of unhealthy environment also apparently being created. So for a young person, how do you view this country shaping up for them in the next 20 years?
I think I see a very bright future, and I'm very happy about the churn that's happening. That's Amrit Manthan. So a lot of things will come out invariably, and they better come out. Otherwise, they've been under the carpet for too long. The velvety red carpet which covered everything is now being questioned and opened, and things are being brought out of the darkness to light. And tamasoma jyotirgamaya, let come in, and then let us all explore with objectivity what is this country about, what is this civilization about, what is this value system which has become the only living civilization on planet Earth, which still calls it Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in spite of being actually pillaged.
True.
For centuries. And
True.
Still people are targeting. I mean, be it missionaries or others, they're still targeting.
Continuing to.
And then we are accepting, because for us, any form of worship is acceptance of God. So for us, the path is not important. As long as you're doing it honestly and sincerely, that's Bhagavad Gita for you. So therefore, which path you choose is significantly not that important for most of us. So we really don't bother. If my child doesn't want to go to a temple, I'm okay with it. But I tell him, boss, you need to understand there is a superior power. How you relate to it, either before the exam or before the result, it's up to you. You learn on your own.
True.
Isn't it? This is a journey of inquiry. Who am I? To find out that answer to that question is the journey of evolution of our Atma to Paramatma to Advaita at some stage.
On that note, sir, and a perfect note to end this conversation, thank you so much for making time today. I know I've made you travel all the way from your office in Delhi and battle this traffic at this hour and come to us, but thank you so much. It was a very invigorating and enlightening conversation. There are many more questions on each of these subjects, and we can continue with this conversation for a longer time, but probably we'll bring you back on the show sometime again to talk more.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
If you want to continue listening in to such interesting conversations about Bharat, do like and subscribe.